Hey, this is O'Teal. If you're liking what you're hearing, head on over to patreon.com/comesatimepod and get your bus pass for an extra episode every week.
Comes a Time podcast. I'm Mike.
I'm O'Teal. Sorry if I still have a little bit of tears in my eyes.
We record these intros right after we do the episode, and we just had Paul Stamets and Bob Weir.
Man, for those of you who don't know Paul Stamets, he is a mushroom expert. And I got turned on to him through podcasts years ago and have just been on the train ever since. And it's kind of still freaking out that, you know, we got him on the podcast and that I know him. And just, you know, yeah. So, but wow.
Well, and even to back up a little bit further, when we had Bob Weir on, right when we shut the mics off, you know, we kept talking and mushrooms came up in the conversation, and he said, we really should have my friend Paul Stamets on and me, and we'll do a talk about, you know, mushrooms and about consciousness. And here it had happened. And we, you know, thank you, Bob, for recommending it. And thank you, Paul, for making it happen too. And it's just, this was something.
It was even better than I thought it was going to be. And I was going in with super high expectations just because I know him. You can literally just let him go for like 3 hours and I'm riveted. Nobody else has to speak. But wow. And the end, you should wait for the end part. The end part's real good, man. It just meant so much to me personally. I'm not going to ruin it at all. But it's deep.
Anytime that we can spend time with Bob and for, you know, this combination is just, I mean, this is just something that I would wake up and be like, I had a dream last night that Paul Stamets and Bob Weir were on the podcast, and here it was. So
just beautiful.
Thank you guys so much, and please enjoy and listen, and we'll see you next time. There's really not much else to say. Go on and listen.
Yeah, other than you're welcome. And I say that as humbly as I possibly can.
Yeah, totally.
For real.
Enjoy, everyone.
So when I went to India, we adopted a girl from India, a little girl. And when I was over there, I hadn't seen Star Trek in forever. And then I saw someone was like, oh, you got to see the Discovery one. Because I think we were talking about mushrooms. But he didn't know about you. And he didn't. So when I heard Captain Stamets, I was like, nah, really? And they said your full name. I was like, what? I called my I was wishing I could call my brother. He passed away, but I just freaked out, man. And it was crazy. So that blew my mind. And I was already a huge fan of yours, you know, but having those.
Well, yeah, we can talk about that whole backstory. So I have a lot of information on that. That's kind of fun.
Sweet,
So.
I love it.
Yeah, go for it.
Outer space and UFOs is my thing too. And we've had a Harvard professor on that was talking about UFOs and so I like, to me, they all come together like religion, spirituality, UFOs, tripping, music, like it all is like connected together. So I'm glad you don't mind talking about the Star Trek part.
Yeah.
How'd you feel about him being gay?
Well, okay, there's quite a few. About a week before they came out, right, with the announcement. They called me up and they said, we didn't ask you a question. We never asked you whether you're comfortable with the fact that your character, astrobiologist Paul Stamets on Star Trek Discovery, is gay. And I laughed. I said, are you kidding? It's a badge of honor. I can tell all my gay friends I've come out of the closet, right? So it was a funny show. So this whole Star Trek thing happened because Alex Kurtzman and the other writers of Star Trek, they saw my TED Talk. I have a TED Talk and a TED Med Talk. I talk about mycelium being an archetype and mycelium and and neurons of the brain, the computer internet, the organization of dark matter.
Yeah.
These that these structures, these networks reproduce themselves on different scales of magnitude, because networks are a way of nature elaborating not only communication networks, but setting up guilds of matter and guilds of organisms that then create a commonality of knowledge, a body intellect. And so, I talk about this a lot in the past, many years. So they saw that and they got real excited and they said, we're in the dungeon. There's 12 of us. We're supposed to do the next Star Trek Discovery series and we're stuck. And we saw your TED Talk and we're just, really excited to talk to you. So they set up an appointment. I was up in Cortez Island, British Columbia, where I have a place, and I actually built my cabin in celebration of Star Trek Enterprise. And so they called me up and I said, listen, turn on your video recording, record all this because this is going to be great. And so I showed them my cabin, which is designed combining three elements: Star Trek Enterprise, the bridge, mushrooms, their raptors have gills, and there's three hexagons for bees. And I'm really into bees.
Yeah.
And so and the organization of the first hexagon is 36 feet in diameter and then across and 224s. So the shape of it sort of looks like a Klingon vessel or whatever. So they called me up and they asked me, listen, do we have any ideas? And I go, turn on your tape recorder. So, and I just ripped, on this vein of consciousness. And then towards the end, they said, the whole future of terraforming other planets is using fungi. Because fungi are the first organisms that come to land. They munch rocks. They release minerals for plants, and then the algae followed. And fungi and algae came together to form lichens. Lichens are on rocks. It's a dual relationship between a fungus and a plant. And so, when you terraform other planets, you're going to use fungi. And I always wanted to be the first astromycologist. So I said, astromycologist, and they go, we can use that, astromycologist. Oh my God, that's perfect for us. And I said, I always want to be the first astromycologist, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to get there, right? Because of my lifespan. And then they kind of chuckled and snortled in the background. And so after that, I met and they go, oh my gosh, this is so perfect for the next central theme of Star Trek is my son and astromycologist Paul Stamets. And so they sent me a release and I signed my life away. I mean, I get not a penny for this, but I said, I just did, and that's probably why they put me as a character, right? I was a freebie. And then so they had several more conversations and of course they get 99.9% of the credit because they've built this entire, structure upon the foundation of mycelium. But I talked about dark matter, how you can use, you can go into hyperspace, and these mushrooms and mycelial networks allow you to enter into a different dimension of being.
So you came up with that. Wow.
Yeah, and you can simultaneously exist anywhere in the universe using the portal of universal consciousness, which the psilocybin mushrooms you enter. So time space then becomes irrelevant in a sense, because it gives you the ability to connect with universal consciousness. And then I gave him some other ideas, which I see these ideas come out about every 4 or 5 or 6 episodes. And I go, there it is.
That's awesome.
And I gave him another idea I really hope that they use. And I can tell you a little bit about it.
Well, I think
it's part of my game.
I got a prediction. I think you are going to become the actual physical first astromycologist, because I don't know if you noticed that the USA and China and the UAE, which I didn't even know had a space program, all went to Mars within like 3 days of each other. There was like a race going on. I don't know why. I think I know why, but it was too close to be a coincidence. Well, it's more than just that. We actually applied with NASA scientists. We visited the Ames Research Center. We went down there on for the
need an astrobiologist.
Yeah.
And you can't have biology plants without fungi.
Exactly.
Fungi support all plants. And so we met with them. And then about 6 weeks ago, we made an application for astromycology through the NASA space program. And what they wanted my co-authors on this research project, when again they did the heavy lifting, I just kind of come in with the central ideas, the references, I write a few paragraphs, but they're doing heavy lifting, and their concept was to use astromycology on asteroids. The idea, So the Mars stuff, of course, you can astromycology as well.
Yeah, because they want to terraform.
Yeah, but the planet is, with the planets, they're going around the solar system, but asteroids have this ability of traveling enormous distances outside of the ellipse of the planets. And so they're really looking at asteroids as being a sort of a planetary vehicle for getting out of the solar system into other. So how do you create a sustainable? We can go to Mars, we can go back to the Earth, we can get more soil, we can go back and forth, etc. Yeah. Asteroid, you're gone, right? So the idea is, you don't have to have a propulsion system once you're on an asteroid. Yeah. You just need to choose the right asteroid going in the right direction. And then you can make adjustments if you need to. But that was really an interesting concept to me, is to use asteroids as planetary vehicles. And if we do that, we have to have sustainable food. And so our NASA application for astromycology is centralized on asteroids, but it can be, of course, replicated for other moons
you're almost there
as well.
Once the application gets approved,
I'm almost there.
I'll tell you what, being a writer, being a TV writer in a writer's room, what a gift to have you come on and just brainstorm. Oh my Lord, that's a dream come true. I mean, really.
Well, Anthony Rapp is amazing. I'm so proud of him. But the first 2 or 3 episodes I watched, and I just sunk my head in my hands, and my friends called me up going, Stamets, your reputation is permanently damaged. This guy's an asshole. and so I called up the writers, because the first 3 episodes, my character is really a negative person. Yeah. I called up the writers going, what is going on? They said, wait. Yeah. And so it came out that astromycologist Anthony Rapp, AKA Paul Stamets, was a true scientist. And when he realized that his invention would be militarized, then his whole attitude was, I don't want to help the military, take advantage of my invention. So then he had sort of this reckoning, and began to understood, that the prime directive and with a purpose of Star Trek is the celebration of diversity. And that's what I said to the Star Trek writers, that we have the ability of forming our future with the narratives of today. We can create the models and the scenarios that become an instruction guide, so to speak, a map to a greater understanding of the importance of diversity. The importance of the plurality of diversity supports the commons. So we have a better ability, it's skill sets. Just like with the guilds of microorganisms, when you denature nature, you lose biodiversity, and you lose organisms that might have certain genomic sequences that could break down a pesticide, a hydrocarbon, a toxic waste, enable the flourishing of plants or a keystone species that opens up a whole new vein in sustainability of ecosystems. And we don't know what those talents are right now, because we're still Neanderthals with nuclear weapons. We just don't have the full understanding of the importance of each organism and what the skill sets are. So keeping these guilds and keeping these biodiverse ecosystems intact, a la even in Star Trek, even in our ecosystem, is a model for us to have not only survival, but be able to evolve into a higher state of being, a higher state of consciousness, a higher state of humanity. And this is what I think psilocybin mushrooms do. So they even have an episode of psilocybin mushrooms, and after Anthony Rapp gets a diamond, after he merged, becomes a very affable, friendly, likable person. Right. So I think that was okay. They got that. Once you
Absolutely.
It's so true though. It's what our country and world needs. It's like, it's just a profit motive. And it's like, why would you let any being on this planet not have like the best education that it could get, aside from just food, shelter, and, you know, all those things? Because that person could cure this or discover that. Like, you just don't know. The potential's there for our evolution to move forward faster, for us to just thrive way more than we are. We could be creating an Eden instead of just like sucking the fucking planet dry.
We could create an Eden in between our ears too. Like, get out of our own way. I think that's how it starts. That's the most important part. And I think that's been, you know, something that's been extremely exciting for me. And what I've been dying to talk with you about, Paul, is the, you know, there's something you said recently. There was people medicine versus profit medicine. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely love that concept. You know, in a world where, you know, so many people are kind of handed anti-anxieties or antidepressants or something that just sort of mutes them or takes a little bit of the, you know, softens the edges. When really that's a plan for them to stay on it for the long term. We're not changing anything. We're just softening, you know, the experience. The idea of kind of taking a dose or a micro dose, and, you know, whether it's in tandem with therapy or meditation, is such an unbelievably promising, you know, notion. And it's amazing that and I'm very excited that it's getting the attention that it really deserves.
Finally.
Well, it's you know, it's for those people listening who have not seen the massive surge in research. There's over 40 institutions that have approved clinical studies for psilocybin. Now, they go through what's called the institutional review boards. They go through, in this case, the United States, the FDA and Canada Health. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, you know, it's the best universities, medical universities in the world. And in order to get approval, you have to make sure that the substance is non-toxic. Well, psilocybin turns out to be one of the most non-toxic drugs ever analyzed, that set itself apart from all others. It has to meet a critical need. And Mike, that's what you just alluded to. If you have depression and taking antidepressant medicines, they're largely ineffective after about 8 weeks. And they themselves kind of dumb you down. I know this from personal experiences in my family. And it has to be addressing, and similar to number two, a critical therapeutic need for which other medicines are not addressing. So, and in this case, the psilocybin mushrooms has got a multi-thousand-year history of use. The other thing, which many people may not know, well, most of you have tripped know, it's a 4-hour, 6-hour experience. So that conforms to an 8-hour workday for physicians. Whereas LSD is 12 to 16 hours, right? And that's beyond the 8-hour workday. So from a clinical setting point of view, you can bring in a patient at 8 o'clock in the morning, they can leave at 5 in the afternoon, and conforms to the clinical workday of the physicians doing the studies. I mean, things like that have a practical significance value, moreover. So but there's the benefits of the clinical studies that I've mentioned. And I populate a website that's unbranded, just for scientists and intellectually curious people. It's called mushroomreferences.com. You can go and there's like 48 studies on psilocybin. You can look up, so people feel free to go in there. You can look at the medicinal properties of mushrooms. But in the summary take home is treatment of addiction from one psilocybin experience or two. More than a 60% of people who are addicted to cigarettes are no longer addicted 12 months later, with the most addictive substances known. The other, of course, the opioid pandemic. There's lots of studies that are addressing that. Some of these don't have, I mean, for 60% of the people to kick cigarettes is extraordinarily powerful. Think about, and then the people who are no longer are suffering from PTSD. And what has come out of the Johns Hopkins studies, one that's often quoted, is 14 months later. And going back and speaking to the patient, the family, the friends, their business associates, they see a significant improvement in their attitude. And the patients, when they remember the experience, the remembering of the experience has and with PTSD patients, it's been theorized that, reliving trauma even is very difficult. And even the therapists are very skilled at this and trying to unravel and let the patient, deal with the trauma by reliving it. Well, that's a long, long haul. And if it was psilocybin therapeutically under a clinical setting with good therapists, they're able to leapfrog through years of potential therapy with 1 4 to 6 hour session. And then the patients, in this case, 14 months later, by remembering their psilocybin session that was dealing with the PTSD, it overlays as being the primary memory, that they now remember the resolution of the PTSD as opposed to the PSD being this big dark cloud, that's constantly behind them. So that's so the PTSD, the addiction, there's these meta studies that my partner, Dr. Pam Crisco, she's a founder of the Canadian Psychedelic Association. You met her, Teal. And she's been very much involved in these meta studies. And the meta studies, there are retroactive studies looking at surveys, in the one case with prisoners. And they analyze, what drugs have you taken? And they dived into the meta study and they found that the psilocybin users had like a 16 to 22 to I think 27% reduction of larceny, burglary, and violent crime.
Yeah.
Think of that. Now, association, we could be argued, is not causation. But then other studies show if one of your partner has tripped on psilocybin, there's a statistically significant reduction in partner-to-partner violence.
Wow.
So that's significant. Then so when you start looking at these meta studies, you start being able to see that the therapeutic benefits of psilocybin have many ramifications throughout society. Hey, Bobby.
Hey.
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Sorry I'm late. I was woodshedding.
That's okay.
Yeah,
we were just talking to Paul about the Super Bowl, so you weren't missing anything.
It's good to see you, Bob. You're looking good, man.
Thank you. I got a project going on right now. We got a show coming up on Friday evening, and I got to do a lot of woodshedding for this show. And the Super Bowl was an excellent opportunity because there was really nothing to watch except
Exactly. It's so true.
Well, I was ashamed when President Biden asked for a 1 minute of silence for the 440,000 Americans who died from COVID, and there are people in the audience booing.
Really? I didn't hear that, but I also wasn't watching.
I was so hurt by that. I said, WTF, where's the humanity and empathy? It doesn't matter where you are politically. We have 440,000 Americans die, and you want a moment of silence and people booed?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just time for us to evolve to a higher state of consciousness, And it's a lesson on how not to act. Yeah. And maybe that's good. Maybe it's good that we have such a great contrast, because I think it's a time for the human species to evolve to a higher state of being.
Yeah, and
I think it's really great that this kind of thing is being revealed. The pandemic has been good for that, because now it's not just like, oh, it's your propaganda against my propaganda. It's like, look, 400-some thousand people died and you just booed. But if it was 9/11 and it was like 2,000 something, you'd be all, Well,
it's also what happens when you serve a trash can full of beer, too. Every glass of beer is about 75 ounces. So it's,
it's sad.
But, the great thing, and Bobby, what the dead have done so well, and I applaud you for really setting a standard of cooperation and love and community. And I was a good friend of Ken Kesey, you know, and the Kesey family. And Kesey's skill was because he looked so straight, you know, and he loved going up to law enforcement officers and finding commonality of opinion, you know, and engaging them. And
Never
so
trust
the
a
dad is,
prankster.
the dad has really set that, you know, really a higher path of empathy and humanity and kindness. And that's been a big influence in my life, is to go forward in life with courage and kindness. And we don't have to politicize. You know, there are times we have to step up to the plate. It's important we do. But so much of us, we can demonstrate by our actions of a better path for people to follow, because we can blaze that trail. And the dead have done that. The dead have done that better than any social group that I know of. So.
Yeah, thank you, Bob, for that.
But I'm prejudiced, so.
I am too. Why do you think it is that mushrooms create that extra empathy? Is it just how it just interacts with our consciousness? Because, Bob, I know you personally, I don't want to speak for you, but it seems to me like you prefer mushrooms over alternatives.
Well, yeah, I like mushrooms. You know, there's a lot of time on the road. There are a lot of times on the road when I just don't get enough sleep. And, you know, I stay too busy, or I just don't sleep. You know, I wake up too early or whatever. And I love the mushrooms. If I try to counteract that with coffee, that's going to keep me up. Caffeine doesn't work well with my system. But the mushrooms, you know, they put a little spring in my step, a little light in my eyes, and add about 20 IQ points, but beyond that, there's something about them, as I'm quite sure we're all aware, that there seems to be some sort of beneficent spirit behind them that doesn't mind humanity and what humanity's up to, and doesn't have it in for us. And I can't imagine, you know, whatever that benevolent spirit is, given our history and what we've done to this planet, it's got to be a pretty accommodating, that spirit, whatever it is. It's because we've not shown it our best, and it still seems to like us.
Yeah. And Bobby, just before you came on, we're talking about some of the meta studies, and I mentioned several about partner-to-partner violence reduction associated with psilocybin use, reduction of crime. The other study that came out was those who have taken psilocybin just one time or more, are much more pro-environmental and express anti-authoritarian views. They are not so taken by authoritarian figures. And so they do have this greater humanity. I think mushrooms inherently bring out the good in people. And when you look at crime and or addiction, and we all know and have friends who are addicted or have suffered, and it's not only them, but it's their immediate family. It's in the court system, and it's the lawyers, and it's the industrial court criminal system that has created a profit motive for churning these victims, who makes their place in society lower, more challenges because now they're tagged as being an ex-con or something like that. It increases criminality. The court systems do that because that throws these innocent people who are drug users in a prison system with highly professional criminals that then, because of their victimization, because of wanting to fit into that society, they can be criminalized by the true criminals, who have pathological behavior. And so what I think this is so important is that the return to a benefit to society is economically so significant, not only sociologically, but economically, because then it reduces crime. It reduces the tension within the family, your neighbors, your community, your city, your country, the world. And so I think these are paradigm shifting substances that can lead to a much more peaceful and creative society. And you mentioned IQ points. We've been doing a lot of research specifically on neurons and neurogenesis with psilocybin and psilocybin analogs. And now we have evidence of this. We can show that the psilocybin analogs in psilocybin mushrooms, so it's not just a pure psilocybin molecule, it's called the entourage effect. We can show that the psilocybin analogs that are naturally present in this mushroom code for the genetic expression of what's called NGF, nerve growth factors, that stimulate nerves to repair themselves, to cause remyelination and regeneration of neurons. These actually cause an increase in neurogenesis, which then, as we get aged, get older, we start to decline in our cognitive abilities. So it is true that psilocybin mushrooms, what we've seen now in the laboratory, and now we're taking to clinical studies to make these measurements, it looks like, and I make the phrase that psilocybin mushrooms may be Einstein mushrooms. They actually increase the intelligence of us. And the tragedy of age is these encyclopedic reservoirs of knowledge, our elders, then lose the ability of transferring knowledge to the next generation. What would happen if we had millions of Einsteins surviving into their 80s and 90s to be able to pass on this knowledge? I mean, it lifts up the next generation to a higher state of knowledge. And that's what I think these things are really underestimated. And this is why there's 44 clinical studies or institutions doing clinical studies showing these benefits. And they're spread out to addiction and depression, anxiety, creativity. Johns Hopkins is doing anti-Alzheimer's clinical studies with psilocybin as I speak. So there course of scientists, all vetted and approved by the FDA and other institutions, that are supporting the science. So what we've known folklorically and what you've experienced, Bobby, and it may, this is now rooted in provable scientific method. And that's what I think is interesting, is folkloric use is now substantiated by scientific methodology.
The blowback, I think we have to somehow learn to anticipate the blowback and where it's going to come from and who it's going to come from. For instance, the fossil fuel industry is not going to be real happy to see, probably not going to be real happy to see this kind of information get out and lots of people going in this direction, because it makes you environmentally more aware, and that's not a good thing for their business model. And so I could anticipate that kind of thing. I could anticipate the hardcore Christian right, God bless them, salt of the earth, but they tend to think of everything as a Satanist cult. And I'm sure that they've applied that label, that nomenclature to the use of mushrooms. If they haven't, they'll get around to it. And who else?
Pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, I mean the
pharmaceutical
Prozac
industry.
sales folks. They're
really, the pharmaceutical industry are going to want to try to break down the various components and that are useful components and isolate them, and the entourage effects be damned. We want to find they'll try to isolate the various components of what mushrooms bring to the table, and offer them in prescription form, and of course it'll probably be addictive in that case, because, for instance, valerian root is real useful, but once they went after that and made Valium out of it, it was found to be quite addictive. And you take away the entourage components of a given substance, and isolate one or two elements of it, you start to play with you're playing with fire. But that's what they know how to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're looking for a signal response, with a single molecule, the magic bullet, so they can identify, and oftentimes it's been symptom treated as opposed to root cause. And so they mask the symptoms and they say that this is a cure, or they get approval because now they can measure a downregulation of the symptoms associated with the disease complex. But we didn't grow up with we grew up with massive complexity in nature, and we have, our receptors are incredibly complicated, especially in terms of our neurons. We're involved in a lot of research right now, specifically on neuroanti-inflammatories. We can show that the entourage molecules present in psilocybin mushrooms stimulate neurons at the same time they're growing. It has neuroanti-inflammatory properties. This is really important, especially with COVID right now. And we have been approved, and I can announce this. So we have a COVID clinical trial ongoing right now, not with psilocybin. We'll do that later, but with turkey tail and agarikon because of the neuroanti-inflammatory properties. So it's at clinicaltrials.gov. We've entered into phase 1. So we got approval by the FDA specifically because we're able to upregulate immune readiness at the same time. Modulate the immune response so you don't have a cytokine storm. Don't have an overreaction of the immune system that then, especially in the late stages of the disease with COVID, this is a real problem. That's why people die from respiratory arrest, or heart attacks, just because the lungs become so gorged because of the overexpression of the immune system. And then you get secondary infections that can co-occur, et cetera. So there's a lot, the complexity of nature and looking at the complexity of the immune system. Now there's a Venn diagram in science where there's an intersection of the understandings that you need to have enhanced immunity that's modulated. So you have a better ability of preventing infection, but then you don't have the overexpression of immune factors that damage you, the host. And this is an area and field of science that begrudgingly, I think, some of the old school conventional pharmacologists are slowly inching towards the idea that multiple molecules can be beneficial. They found this with AIDS, the anti-HIV drugs as a cocktail. That was difficult, but because the urgency of finding a treatment for AIDS, the multi-cocktail approach is now considered to be one of the standard protocols.
Is this same principle involved with how you were curing the bee colonies?
Yeah, we have a big breakthrough in bees, and we just got more evidence 2 days ago, which I'm really excited about, on longevity. And
would you go into that?
Pardon?
Would you tell that story? Because this is news to my ears, and I think it's important news.
Well, it's a fun story, and let me rip for about 3 minutes on this. Let me tell you the story. I was a beekeeper. I am a beekeeper, and in 1984, I had 2 beehives, and I had a garden giant mushroom patch in my wood chips in my garden. And one day in July, I go out to my garden to water my mushroom patch, and it's covered with bees. And I see the bees moving the wood chips off to the side, and I look really closely, and I can see them sipping on little droplets coming from the mycelium. These are called extracellular metabolites, little sweat droplets. If you see mycelium, they have little golden droplets oftentimes on them. And so I thought that was curious. I go back the next day, and they're back. And I go back next day. For 40 days, there's a continuous convoy from my beehives to my garden giant wood chip patch in my garden. So I thought, wow, this is amazing. They're probably going after just sugars because mycelium liberates sugars from wood and cellulose. So I put it in first in the Harrow-Smith magazine, 1988. And then I put it in one of my books in 1999. I forgot about it, more or less. I didn't really forget about it, but I didn't have the same context. And then my friend Louis Schwartzberg, he was doing he was a filmmaker, did Fantastic Fungi, the very popular movie right now. And he was doing a filming on pollinators. And he said, Paul, you know about colony collapse disorder? And I had heard about it, but he had been interviewing the scientists, and it's far worse, folks, than people know. Colony collapse is sweeping the entire planet. Beekeepers are very proud. They don't want to tell the regulators they've lost most of their beehives, so they underreport. So the reporting the USDA have, we know, are underreports. Oklahoma 2 years ago lost 84% of its beehives. 84%. If you were a herder of sheep or cattle, or you had chickens or lamb, if you lost 84% of your flock, it is an incredible threat to worldwide food biosecurity. Now, what's happened is there's about 5 viruses, but the deformed wing virus is the worst. And if you've seen my presentation, the deformed wing virus, the bumblebees, for instance, it also infects bumblebees. The bees, the way they have no wings, they just have little sticks. They can't fly. The bee pollinates up to 1,000 hours per day. And bees used to fly for 9 days, the honeybee, for instance. And that means 9,000 flowers, 9,000 almonds, 9,000 cherries, 9,000 apples. This is so important. And now the bee flight is only about 5 days or 4 days. So that's been cut in half. So that's 4,000, 5,000 less apples, cherries, almonds, etc. So the deformed wing virus has restricted the lifespan of the bees. And now the varroa mite, which came in the United States around 1984, is like a dirty hypodermic syringe. And they lock on the backs of bees and they inject these viruses into the bees. And so now the bees that are infected, when they go to a flower, they leave these viral particles on the flower, and then bumblebees and wild bees come to the flower and they become infected. So now all the bees in the world, it's been stated, are infected with these viruses. It's the most immediate threat to worldwide food biosecurity.
Wow.
Okay, so I had my story. Louis talked to me. I got involved with the BioShield program directly after 9/11. You can Google my name, Stamets and smallpox, and NPR, National Public Radio. I hit a huge home run with this polypore mushroom called agaricon in the old growth forest. And then the top 10 of more than 2 million samples studied by the BioShield program, we have a vetted press release approved by DOD. We hit the home run against bird flu, swine flu, and pox viruses using a natural extract of mycelium, like this extracellular droplets I saw in the garden. I made an extract of that mycelium grown in the laboratory, and we were better than ribavirin, cidofovir, and acyclovir, 2 big antiviral drug controls. So we hit a home run on that. And so I had that thing, after 9/11, but those were in vitro tests. So I heard about the bees. I thought, okay, well, what if these antiviral properties and benefits seen from these polypore mushrooms that we proved in the BioShield program can help bees survive from viruses? And that was my big epiphany. And I did that. And working with the USDA and Washington State University, and my other scientists get lots of credit. I'm the primary author in an article in Nature, Nature Scientific Reports. Only about 7% of the articles submitted to Nature get approved, so it's a high bar. Our article still to this day is in the top 1% of all articles ever downloaded by other scientists in the Nature publication ecosystem. So for the skeptics out there, please go to our article, Extracts of Polypore Mushrooms to Reduce Viruses in Honeybees, and look at what we've done. We can reduce viruses, in one case, 45,000 to 1 with one treatment. Putting the extracts into sugar water, which all commercial beekeepers use. Right. Now, the deformed wing virus are about 100, but if you had HIV or if you had HPV, you had herpes, and you went into a doctor 12 days later, and they said you have a nearly 1,000 times reduction of your virus. Or with COVID, you can imagine. Oh, that's a huge improvement.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And so now we've correlated that with longevity. So our article now, I think the reason why it's so it's in the top 1% of all scientific articles published in Nature is that with the first time we're able to prove that a natural product is more powerful than a pharmaceutical because of the entourage effect. We activate all these upregulation of immunity that gives your host defensive resistance a much higher state, and being able to prevent the virus from replicating and preventing it to become reinfected. So this narration, I think, continues because I think I found something fundamental to the foundation of nature, in that the mycelial networks that grow in the forests influence the immunological health of bees, birds, swine, people. How far more does it go? But when we deforest and cut down the forest, we're removing the menu of food for fungi that can create the guilds of microorganisms that support homeostasis and the health of the ecosystem. So when we denature nature, when we deforest, we then reduce biodiversity especially of the microorganisms that are resident, and underneath every footstep that we take. And I think this is a huge breakthrough in understanding that even some of the scientists what's the mode of action? What I want to know, what molecule does what? Well, my favorite quote from Voltaire is, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." The fact that you have this benefit that you can measure, the bees live longer. And this is a animal clinical study. Bees are animals. So we're out of the laboratory into animals. The fact that you can demonstrate that there's an increase now, and we have just this past week, our scientists at Washington State University, huge extension of longevity. So we now can get those bees to live longer, survive longer. And so the ramifications of this, I think, are just enormous. And there's a great door for natural products being re-examined for the complexity of benefits that they offer, rather than looking for a simple signal response pathway of one molecule.
Wow. It sounds like it would be huge for COVID. Like if your system is just stronger, Well,
so right now I heard from the CDC, there's 500,000 to 1 million variants per day of COVID. Every time someone gets infected, there's mutations.
Absolutely.
And just a few of those, now the South African variant, these other variants, and now I just got the Moderna vaccine. I know it's controversial. I'm a big believer in vaccines, folks. If we didn't have vaccines, we'd still have smallpox. Yep. And so for people who are anti-vaxxers, it's a personal decision. I respect everyone's personal decision, but follow this logic trail for me. If a vaccine kills one person and saves 1 million, is it justified? I would say, of course, most people would say that. 1 out of 100,000, probably still justified. 1 out of 1,000, probably still justified. 1 out of 100, getting kind of close there, folks. 1 out of 10, not in my family.
Yeah.
Right.
So I would be against vaccines if it killed one person, saved 9. But everyone needs to do that math to see where their comfort range is. Smallpox is a clear example.
Right.
Polio is a clear example that the vaccines are beneficial. So the problem that we have with COVID, we have so many reservoirs, there's so many mutations that are occurring, that they're just announcing that you have to have booster shots. Are we gonna have booster shots every month for all the new variants?
Yep.
Now you're really disturbing the homeostasis of the immune system. I'm really concerned about that. So if we can upregulate immune readiness with these mushrooms, that you prevent these, it doesn't matter what the viral variant is, your immune system is educated, on alert, and able to produce antibodies quickly because you have a higher state of your immune system is in a higher state of readiness. I think this is a pathway that can be an adjunct to conventional therapy, and and time will tell. So we're looking at bird flu now because zoonotic diseases. If you've seen my lectures, I've been talking about zoonotic pandemics for the past 20 years. We will have another viral storm. We've entered in a period of viral hurricanes. We will have H5N1, which is 70% fatal. It's not like COVID, 70% fatal with bird flu. These are coming from factory farms because of the decimation of the natural ecosystems, and factory farming is just a perfect, microbial, launching point or a contagion soup for the spreading of viruses. So this is now not a one-off event. We have entered a period, I think, of permanent viral hurricanes. And what are we going to do? Vaccinate against each one every month? I think there's some evidence that these multiple vaccinations can actually disturb baseline immunity. And we're in uncharted territories. We just don't know.
Yeah.
And everybody seems to be in this huge rush to get back to whatever they consider to be normal. And that seems to be we were talking earlier about addiction and how mushrooms can really help with the treatment of addiction. I think our society has a huge addiction to feelings and a huge addiction to emotions and preconceived notions. Anyone that suffers with anxiety feels anxiety when you don't feel anxiety. You are addicted to the anxiety. So, the use of psilocybin to help the addictions that we have on our own emotions is an incredible part that I'd love to talk with you about too.
We have a new app that Dr. Pam and I co-developed with two friends, Ismail and Kalen. It's a quantified citizen. It's called microdose.me. It's just for the Apple, the Droid version. It's a free app, and it measures anxiety and measures depression with non-microdosers and microdosers. We have, I think, about 15,000 people that have entered into the program. We're publishing a paper here in the next month or so. And then we have a second paper that shows enormous reduction of anxiety and depression and increasing of mood with microdosing. And we have over 4,400 non-microdosers, people who just want to measure their cognitive skills and abilities, and whether they're losing their ability to remember, to react to the reaction times. There's memory tests. We have over 4,500 people, non-microdosers, and then 4,000 plus people microdosing. And the statistical significance is just extraordinary, showing the benefit. And then I realized that emotions and anxiety and mood affects immunity. So I went on to PubMed in the Lancet and found articles that show, when people are depressed, their immune systems are actually depressed as well. They're more susceptible to adverse adverse events from diseases, and they're less. They have a less probable degree of positive outcome using conventional medicine. So, and many studies. So there's a direct tie to emotional state of being and immunity. And then I realized, well, if you're happier, you're more creative. If you're creative, you're happier, and your immune system then is elevated.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, what about microdosing for cancer patients, for people who are facing challenging diseases in combination with conventional therapy? Because by increasing your mood, you're increasing your readiness to positively react to conventional therapy as a cofactor. So I think there's a direct correlation that this is the evolution of medical science, is that if we can get our patients optimistic about the positive outcome, the placebo effect is a real effect. I mean, if your outcome is to help the patient, and again, let's not get lost in the weeds. If you can increase the mood, expectation as well as reality of the microdosing, that could increase the positive outcome of conventional therapy of people fighting cancer, for instance. If you're depressed, I'm going to die, this is not going to work, but I have to go into surgery. Well, you're on that slippery slope of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think there's an interesting, the intersection here between psilocybin use and conventional medicine for treating other diseases could be a real opener in enhancing the positive outcomes.
You see that with people, like if they're older people, they've been married for a really long time and the partner dies and then the other one dies like very quickly after that, even though they were fine. But it's that emotional state and everything just kind of shuts down.
I think all of us know too many examples of that. So.
Yeah, I keyed in on when you were talking about how it could help with Alzheimer's and stuff. My dad has dementia. He's 90. He just turned 90 on January 6th. Happy birthday, Dad, that day. And so I told my sisters that I said, I think I want to microdose him just to see what happens, So I talked with them about it, and my mom and everybody. And I just got off Dead & Company tour, and I showed up and I was like, here's my idea. I just want to give him a little dose, and then I'm going to DJ all his old favorite jazz records. Right. So I gave, showed it to my mom. It just looked like a little booger. It was that goo stuff. And I said, Mom, and she gave me this look, and I showed it to her. I was like, Dad, come on, let's look as little. Like, what's it? And he just grabbed it and popped it. And I was like, uh-oh. So then my nephews were like, how long do you think it'll take? I said, usually it takes me about 30 minutes to kick it, like 15 minutes in. They're like, Uncle Oteil, I think it's kicking in.
Your dad's DJing all your old funk albums?
Well, he was just sitting on the couch, like, kind of checked out. And then, so it's just like they could see activity going. So I got the Bluetooth speaker and we hooked up, and I just started, every time I saw a jazz record label, the album cover that I recognized, I would just start hitting it, 6 hours straight. My sisters were blown away. We were saying we've never seen him this animated and focused. Every 20 minutes, he was singing. I don't remember hearing him singing complicated melodies, too, of these old jazz tunes. Every once in a while, he'd look up and he'd go, "Ladies and gentlemen, that's called bebop." And then he'd go back into his thing, It was just like, and then, I was like, wow, this is really real. You could see his computer just like reboot. And it was he was so happy. They said it's the best day he's had in years. Yeah.
We, my partner is a medical doctor from Canada, and she's collecting case studies. And we recently just got a case study similar to that of a woman in an old folk home who has Alzheimer's or progressive dementia. And the daughter decided to microdose her. Didn't want to tell the nurses or tell anyone. And then after about, I don't know how many days it was, started, Pam's waving at 7 days later, she says, from microdosing, the nurses and the attendants going, "Mother is much better. She's animated. She's talking. She's happy." And then she going, "Okay, I'm going to maybe start mentioning this, And so we're recording this. We have about 50 ones. The most profound one, which I think is important, and here I'm going to get very, very controversial, and I want to say this with all the proper caveats. So people, please do not try this. We have a few examples, but this one potent example, it brings tears to my eyes just remembering it and retelling it. So with all the proper caveats, people consult a qualified medical practitioner. Don't take this story as a roadmap for what you should do. But clinically speaking, I think it's really important. She had an 8-year-old son. She has an 8-year-old son. She wrote me an email. "I need to tell you this story. This is not my real name. This is not my real email address. I made it up so I can tell you the story. I have a son who has an extraordinarily, there's a disorder for it, an expressive disorder where he's angry, he's mean, he hurts small animals. He takes pleasure in just doing evil things to hurt and inflict pain. He's a terrorist with his with his siblings. She actually is afraid of him, of what he could do. And she went to all these therapists. They gave him all these drugs. It's just dumbed him down. She's at the end of her ropes. What do I do? And she implied that she's afraid that she's raising a Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer. She's raising a monster, and she is terrified of her son. In desperation, she dosed him with psilocybin, fully aware that Child Protective Services could take her son away, but she had she's at the end of her ropes. She is living in fear. The whole family's held hostage to this kid who could do anything. And so she dosed him and with herself, and they had this experience, and it was a pleasant experience. It was, it wasn't this breakthrough. It had the effects, and they went on. The next morning, that's gonna make me cry. She hears this noise in the kitchen, and she like, it's up really early. What's going on? She goes outside. He's washing the dishes. He's sweeping the floor. Wow. He said, "Mom, how are you this morning? How can I help you?" He started being nice to his siblings. He started to stop hurting animals. He had a total change in his personality from this extremely dangerous, sociopathic, individual to someone who was kind and caring. And she goes, "People need to know about this." And so there is a study on psilocybin and autism right now that also I think is interesting. So the therapeutic use of psilocybin for children, I think, should be very carefully studied, by the appropriate medical authorities with appropriate controls, all those things, of course, in place. But when you start gathering stories like this, you begin to see a theme. And since there are no good drugs except for down regulating, these people, I call it the dimmer switch. They turn down the dimmer switch. Yeah, your child's not as much of a problem now, but he's doesn't have the personality, the character, the spontaneity factors. He's really been dumbed down. So I think this is a very interesting opportunity for us to create some paradigm shifting medicines who's rooted in psilocybin mushrooms in particular. And so I'm excited about the future. There's more than 20 startup companies in Canada that have formed in the past 2 years, trying to exploit, in my mind, from a business point of view. They're economic opportunists. Actually, one of these groups called me and I said, "You sound like economic opportunists." He goes, "That's exactly what we are." I'm going, "Oh, wow, okay."
They're proud of it.
Bob.
Yeah, I don't think I want to work with you.
Bob, I would love to ask you, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because last time you were on, when we adjourned, you had thoughts of this podcast being what it is, the four of us sitting here talking. So
Right.
I'm really glad that this came true. And, I want to thank you first off for even recommending it. Bob recommended this talk.
Well, Bobby, you have a question, I think.
Well, it was an observation, actually. Given the notion that what we may be looking at is a permanent viral hurricane is caused by factory farming and industrial agriculture and deforestation and all of these combined elements. It's the concept of Gaia, the Earth is an entity much larger than us, and it moves in its own time and stuff like that. But we could be looking. There's a likelihood that we could be looking at the Earth's immune system, having isolated the problem, that being humanity, and okay, well, I guess we're going to have to just we're going to have to deal with this and knock it back a little bit, if not all the way. And the question that brings up is getting on board with the Earth. Is our mushrooms, and I think I expect to hear the affirmative from this assemblage, but is getting on board with the Earth and stopping this regression, this transgression, actually, that the humanity is representing, is our mushrooms and all mushrooms, not just psilocybin mushrooms, but all mushrooms, are going to be a necessary component in doing that, or at least a useful component. I would imagine that if you studied meditation, for instance, to a relatively full degree, and came of a natural awareness of all things, that would put you in the boat with those who are on board with the natural, the way that the planet wants to see things unfold.
Well, I think you're right, but I think the evidence for that is what's happening right now. There's a worldwide surge in interest in mushrooms. I mean, the awakening right now from the mycelial underground, I think, it's a revolution from the underground. And Bob and Teal, I want you to write a new song about mycelium being the revolution from the underground for the paradigm shift in consciousness. I think this is the opportunity here. We need a new anthem. Come on, brothers. But I think what's happening now, because, so many of us have been lone rangers with great adversity in our lives. I was treated like a leper, and now this idea is happening all over the world. The New York Times just 2 days ago had a big article. The Fantastic Fungi movie, is the number one documentary on Apple
Well
for
deserved,
many,
too.
many months, and so I think there is the war on drugs, from Nixon was a war on the African American community. It was a war on the gay rights community. It was a war on the environmental movement. It was a war on the anti-war movement. Nixon conveniently was able to put us all in the same bucket and use drugs and marijuana as the way of suppressing all these freedom movements. The not only the right to vote, and the right of our individual rights, but our rights to our own consciousness. And so I see this as a consciousness revolution. And when we can show there is an increase to societal benefit in reducing crime and reducing the stress on the courts and the law enforcement, and helping community immunity, I think this is really a sort of the Aikido way of creating a paradigm shift. And what I've come to realize, from the recent studies that we have, and I wish I could share everything that I know about right now, but it's just so exciting. The idea of increasing neurogenesis, increasing intelligence. We are, 200,000 to 2 million years ago, Homo sapiens evolved from Homo erectus. There's Neanderthalensis, also Neanderthals came into Europe. Homo erectus was in Europe before Homo sapiens. Only Homo sapiens had one migration that kind of died off. The second migration was 40,000 years ago. We all came from Africa. This is why racism to me is such an absurd thing. We're all come from Africa. We migrated into Europe. Within 4,000 years of contact of Homo sapiens in Europe, Neanderthals became extinct. The Homo erectus became extinct earlier than that. But we are not the same Homo sapiens as we were 200,000 years ago. I think that psilocybin mushrooms could elicit a new evolution of a species of human. And this is our time to take these sacred medicines and this knowledge to be able to actualize the paradigm shift. And Bobby, before we came on and we're talking about Star Trek, and I said the wonderful thing I told the writers of Star Trek is that you show the importance of diversity, you show the importance of kindness, of protecting the commons and the prime directive and not interfering with cultures. You demonstrate a way of being that's on a higher level that we are right now. Well, if we can dream and we have maps, and we have the way we can imagine our future, we can actualize our future. And so I'm suggesting that these psilocybin mushrooms and their analogs, combined with the context of natural systems and what all that means, we're at the threshold of creating a new human species, a species at a higher level of evolution. And I propose it could maybe be called Homo excellus or something like that, whatever name you want to. But we're no longer the apes that we used to be. We're no longer the Homo erectus. We're no longer the Neanderthal. We have common veins, of course. I did a 23andMe study test. I think 2.75% Neanderthal. So, it may show. But my point is that, we're at this accelerated rate of increasing our consciousness and our way of being and our way of behaving. And I think this past 4 or 5 years are antithetical to that, but I think the pendulum swings. And in contrast, we know now how not to act. It's clearer now. There's no ambiguity, that there was before. I think that's one of the greatest lessons and benefits from these past several years is we can see how dark the dark side is and how not to be like that. And at the same time, we have to put our arms out in forgiveness and extension and generosity. You mentioned the Christians might be opposed to this, so I'll tell you a little inside story. I teach these workshops. I don't teach them now because of COVID, but I've had over 2,000 students come through, and I had this very quiet, nice, gentle man come through, and he waited till everyone was done, went out of my little classroom, and he said, I want to tell you something. I'll tell you why I'm here. I said, well, great. Why are you here? So I came here to meet you. And I said, really? He said, yeah, Billy Graham sent me.
Mm-hmm.
I said, what? My mother's a charismatic Christian. I said, really? He said, yeah, I'm in the inner circle of Billy Graham. And many of us have come to Christ through psilocybin mushrooms.
Yeah.
And that we use psilocybin mushrooms in order to become closer to Christ.
This is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about specifically. Because I saw that in your movie.
Yeah, I was like, whoa, I was really surprised, but I'm spiritual, I'm not religious.
Right.
I believe there's a convergence of spirituality and science right now. Who could not be spiritual when you look at the enormity of the universe and what's happening with astronomy? But I like the reaching across the aisle and saying, I've had high doses of psilocybin mushrooms. I've had these Christ-like experiences, but I think that the golden rule pervades all religions: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so I welcomed him. That was his way of coming into his religious beliefs, but the fact that they honored psilocybin mushrooms as a Christian sacrament. And it was a very hidden secret. Billy Graham has died, but this happened. This actually did happen. And so I think it's also the thing about saving the bees. Saving the bees is a #1 bridge between conservatives and liberals. So if you want to have a non-political conversation, talk about saving the bees. The farmers want to save the bees. The hippies want to save the bees. Yeah. So I proposed in Washington State to a bunch of the state legislature I had to testify. I said, listen, tax the stoners to support the bee research, because the farmers will be behind it, and the stoners will go, yeah, save the bees. Oh, yeah, tax marijuana. It's fine with me. So anyhow, I think this is where we need to build bridges, with humor and kindness and respect. I come from a family of farmers. We had over 10,000 acres of wheat in eastern Washington, and my family farm went to no-till farming against the grain. Literally against the grain. They're wheat farmers. And we visited the farm, and my cousin, who was in charge of the farm, he had about 4,000 acres at that time. He said, yeah, we went to no-till, and I got a lot of opposition from this. And he goes, my crop yields did go down for 3 years. But I said, now look at our yields now. And our farm was no-till, beautiful, beautiful farm, no erosion channels at all. The next door farm, conventional tilling, conventional fertilizers, et cetera, eroded with huge, little canyons of erosion. And they were addicted now to the fertilizers and the GMO crops that required the herbicides, et cetera, in order to maintain that system. And so what I'm saying is that organic agriculture is now showing proof of economic returns. And there is this bridging of permaculture to conventional agriculture to farmers who want to use less inputs and depend more on natural systems. So many conservatives and farmers are very much wedded into protecting nature. They just need the right narrative and tools to be able to elocute this. And also the bottom line is that they get more money in their bank account. And if you can prove that, then you've won the battle.
I wasn't raised religious, and I had full-on like Star Trek Outer Limits religious experience when I hit bottom at 40. And I've ended up studying theology, and I'm still a theology geek, even though I'm not a member of any church or denomination or anything like that. But I've always thought, because I did trip when I was like 17, and that was my first like religious experience, not being raised with it. And for the time that I was going to church, non-charismatic church, I will say, because I think it's different for them. It's different in black church, and it's different in charismatic white churches, where they do get to that religious experience thing. But a lot of the other churches that I went to, I was like, these people believe it, and a lot of them have sincere hearts. Some of them are just following what they're told. But I was like, I don't think they've ever. I would ask him. I was like, have you ever had like something weird beyond just deja vu, which I think is legit, but they might write off. But you know, a lot of them hadn't. I thought, man, you know, a lot of these cats should microdose just to see actually what the people that they were following were seeing. What I believe they were seeing. Because there is that component of like, you know, when I first started tripping as a teenager, now I realize I was only doing about 50 mics. I was just doing like a half a hit. And we would just talk. And everything came down to like what I landed on after. I was like, yeah, everything's just messed up because of a lack of love, you know? And I never let go of that belief. And now I play with guys that were in the Grateful Dead. Like it clearly is a throughput of my life. But like what you were talking about, there's this, you know, there's this benevolent spirit of it. You know what? It's real. And maybe there's a benevolent spirit of the earth. And so I want to try to use it because I believe a lot more Christians are doing it on the slide, just like they smoke weed. I know they are. Well, and it's a great bridge to connect with them over an actual religious experience, you know?
And you know, like to add on what prompted the conversation, Paul, between Bob and us that led to having you here was I, you know, told Bob that, you know, I'm one of those folks that have been on and off of a anti-anxiety medication or an antidepressant and I've tripped before. And I know that feeling of love, self-love and self-acceptance and silencing the critic is a real thing. And I took it upon myself to take myself off of an anti-anxiety medication, went through the withdrawals and the brain zaps and the sleepless nights and the, you know, sweating and all of that to bring myself through a microdose a month where I kind of winging a prayer tried to figure out how to do it, and had moments of like, you know, I'm someone who the second my butt hits the couch, the critic's like, you don't deserve a rest. You have so much you haven't done yet, and there's so much you did wrong, and blah, blah, blah. And for the first time in probably my adult life, I was able to sit and just relax with myself for, you know, and look at the clock and go, oh my God, 45 minutes of transcendence just went by, you know? And that's like what it really brought me. And I think about how many people I know personally that it would help that are just constantly beating themselves up. And at the end of 2020, we find that 1 in 6 Americans have gone to therapy for the first time. That's 50 million people in the year of this pandemic. So, you know, it's so important that we bring up, and I'd be remiss not to bring it up before, you know, our time is up, but there are people, microdosing has kind of become this new term, you know, and a lot of people are kind of, you know, trying it as best they can and not really sure how to do it and so on and so forth. I could personally say that it was something that really gave me the feeling that there is hope. And with you here, it's extremely important, I think, that we kind of, you know, talk about that, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, well, the reality is 99% of people taking psilocybin are going to take it in the form of psilocybin mushrooms, irrespective of whether it's medicalized or not. So the push for the pharmaceuticalization of psilocybin is profit-driven. Primarily by economic opportunists who I don't think, some of them do, but most of them are not inspired from the heart. They're inspired because they see many people make money on marijuana. You know, they want to make money, and making money is a tertiary aspect of this. You know, for those of us who understand these substances well and hold them as sacred medicines. So I do think if it is going to be used prescription or is going to be used therapeutically for maximum benefit, we have to standardize. We have to make sure that they're safe. So one of the things that Burning Man, for instance, I don't popularize this, but you can just imagine people come up to me and they show me mushrooms. I go, I can't touch them because as soon as I touch them, I've committed a crime. And I've been really quite impressed with the quality of these mushrooms. They're a closed cap. The veils are still attached from the cap to the stem. They're golden, in color. It's like any economy. Customers, have an influence on increasing quality. But that being said, there is a lot of mushrooms in the so-called underground that are contaminated with bacteria. Bacteria have endotoxins. They're called lipopolysaccharides that cause inflammation. There can be GI upset. And because people are trying to make money, even in the underground, they're not motivated by spirituality. Most of them, some of them might have that as window dressing. But there is a need for standardization of natural forms of psilocybin. And we all pay a lot of money in taxes. One of my big issues with the psilocybin mushroom undergrounds are not paying their fair share back to society. They should be taxed. They're using our roads. They're using the post office. They're using the fire department. You can't cloak yourself that I'm just doing this for spiritual benefit and just make money. Then your motivations, I think, are not in the right place. So standardization is important. Oregon now has legalized psilocybin for therapeutic use. There's a decriminalization movement, which I applaud. I applaud it with one reservation, and that is something I'm very strongly an advocate of. I think we should leave the peyote for the peyote people. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about San Pedro. I'm talking about the wild harvesting of the peyote cactus, since it's so critically important for the peyote people and their journey and their history. I think that we should protect that. We should. Simple possession is one thing, but we should not allow the trafficking of peyote commercially, except with indigenous people, of Texas and Mexico, where the peyote hunt is so important for them and their cosmology. When it comes to psilocybin mushrooms, they're used around the world. There's over 219 species of the mushrooms in genus psilocybe. 119 are psilocybin active. So whether you're in Europe or Ireland or in the Mazatec region or down in Peru or in Amazonia, in Norway, psilocybin mushrooms are growing there. It's kind of the universal bridge of psychedelics that bridges all cultures. So I think that may also make psilocybin very, very interesting and puts it aside in many ways because it is cross-cultural. And so no one owns a quote unquote patent on the psilocybin mushroom use. I went to Peru. I've been down to Peru, and I was shocked by the ayahuasca neon signs. And then, advertising that you could, it's like tourist traps, I have an issue with that. I think ayahuasca, and even though it's had profound benefits, which I don't discount, absolutely on board with that. I am concerned about cultural appropriation because the advantage of many indigenous cultures is they have a continuous use of this uninterrupted, and they've set up rituals of use that protect people. And with a lot of us displaced peoples, we've lost many of the rituals that our ancestors practiced. So we need to set up new conventional rituals that use the best of the wisdom of the past to be able not to replicate a Mazatec ceremony, but just like what is a good conventional therapeutic setting. If you've never done this before, doing it with another person who's experienced, there's a strong advocacy in the psychedelic therapeutic community of a man and a woman that are watchers. So it's just not a man, it's not just a woman.
Yeah.
So you reduce that anxiety of sexual exploitation or having one dominant figure. So having it with two watchers. Most of us who are psychologically stable, we don't need to have that, but people who are journeying or tripping for the first time do need to feel protected. One of my books, I have a great chapter I euphemistically called it good tips for great trips, and it's basically how to set up a set and setting. So, staying warm, being in having a fire, having a protected environment, making sure there's watchers, making sure that no one can unexpectedly show up, and interfere with your experience. I think all those things are helpful. Those people who have a need for therapy, they need to have a therapist there. They need to have a professional. And so I think we have to be extremely careful going forward, because one person jumps out of a 12-story building tripping on psilocybin.
Yeah, it's all
and blames the legalization or decriminalization their parents. That's what happened with the John Birchers, right? The John Birch Society is very notorious with some of their children tripping on LSD, freaking out, and they pick it up as their lifelong mission to destroy anyone promoting the use of psychedelics. So we have to be very careful about that.
Well, it's always, if it's framed as or used as just a party drug, it's like, come on, man, like that's not what I ever used it for, and that was just natural. It wasn't even
we
premeditated.
We have to deal with the way it's been sort of pigeonholed as a party drug or something like that. When really for people who use it, it's anything but what am I looking for? What's the word I'm looking for? It's not entertainment; it's adventure.
Absolutely.
But it's a profound. It's an adventure of a profound sort, and that has to be understood. I guess promoted and understood, so that this patina of indulgence and stuff like that is taken away, because really, this is not idle. This is not an idle pursuit for the folks who are involved.
And speaking
when
as
I
someone
do it
who's
with
been,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say to echo Bob's sentiment. Speaking of someone who's been in, on the lawn at a concert, and having some beers, and then you take off and achieve liftoff. The last thing you want is that beer. You kind of just stand there with your hands in your pockets, going, "Holy cow, here we go!" And it's game time. It's no longer, and that's, you're right. A lot of this idea of it being which also can be very detrimental for a lot of people who think that they're there for the party, and they maybe, take a little bit too much or whatever, and then that's the one who, the bad meal gets 10 more, reviews than the good one.
Right. Yeah.
Unfortunately,
it's what you're going into it with, what the times that I use it with Dead and Company, there's a really specific reason, and that's connection. When we all connect, something telepathic and magical happens. And that's what I'm seeking. I'm not there to like, oh, wow, man, let's do, I never tripped to see crazy stuff. I was never into that. I have one trip like that where I took 3 hits and I saw all kinds of, I didn't like it at all. Not to say that there's no use for that either, but that's not what I was seeking out of it. I was seeking connection, revelation back then as a 19-year-old. But now, and I even think I'm probably not even going to do it. I could see myself like not doing it anymore because I want to get there without it. Like I know the pathway to that connection, but it's a convenience. You know what I mean? And when I do it for that, and then it becomes like, especially when it happens over and over again, and the whole crowd knows it. They're like, because that telepathy, that group mind takes hold, and it's going back and forth from us to the audience. It's not just on the bandstand. It's like, it's a really incredible thing.
And to be sure, there are also people who are heavily spliced into that telepathic connection who've taken no substances whatsoever.
Absolutely.
There are also people who are drunk off their asses who are also spliced in. So it's not a discriminatory sort of situation. still, you know, it's the spirit of the endeavor, really. You know, we're questing there, and I think that may be the elemental thing that brings us all together, is that spirit of quest, and I think we rally around that, and you know, if the mushrooms help,
Yeah.
The amazing thing about these mushrooms is that they tend to follow the debris trails of humans. And so many of the psilocybin mushrooms, besides, psilocybe cubensis growing with cow patties, but the majority of the psilocybin mushrooms grow on wood. And yet they're very hard to find, especially in North America, in native environments. But as soon as you start chipping wood or using beauty bark or building a house, then these psilocybin mushrooms spring up. And that's why it was so surprising in the 1970s. These mycologists in these universities had never seen them. And then the students on campus started picking them out of the wood chips and bringing into the botany lab, the botanists and the laboratory, saying, what are these? And mycologists who worked there for 30 years had never seen them before. So it's interesting. They follow the debris fields of humans. And it's almost like they're following catastrophes that humans are creating. And then they are reaching up to us. But there's one thing I wanted to share with you as musicians that I think is just astonishing. And it was a big epiphany for me. In a very obscure scientific paper, I'm interested in, I grow lots of mycelium. We grow about 20,000 kilos of mycelium a week in my laboratories. All edible mushrooms, folks, not psilocybin, at least not yet. So I'm really interested in the environmental influences on the growth of mycelium: light, temperature, oxygen. And for years and years, and Bobby, you'll love this, the dead have been with me in my laboratories, since the 70s, from the scanning electron microscope, dark star, terrapin station, and I like the long ones. But this research paper that's very obscure looked on sound frequency, on the influence of mycelium. And they look at higher frequency, different frequencies, et cetera. And they were able to find that low frequency sound waves dramatically increase the growth of mycelium. And so it enhanced the growth of mycelium. So I've always had this like world beat, Grateful Dead, this music that resonated, that would reverberate in my laboratories. I just did it because of my own personal preference. But now I have a better understanding. But if you think through this, that these mycelial networks underneath your feet, they're not only digestive membranes breaking down nutrients, breaking down wood and plants for absorption of nutrients and helping plants grow. They're not only externalized lungs, exhaling carbon dioxide, inhaling oxygen. They're not only externalized neurological networks that are sensing the ecosystem and navigating through it for the benefit of the commons, but our tribal ancestors, our current musicians today, when you're playing the bass otil, or there's drumming, and these low frequency sound waves are stimulating the mycelial networks. Well, it dawned on me that then with tribal communities, when they come together to celebrate a wedding, the birth of a child, a harvest, and there's groups of people that are playing drums, etc., these mycelial networks in nature are listening, like strings on a bass, like strings on a guitar, like strings on a piano or a violin, is that by messaging to the mycelium via sound waves, you're stimulating the mycelium to grow faster. And what that is doing is providing more nutrients to the trees that are producing fruit, more nutrients to vegetables that are producing crops. So nature indeed is really listening. Wow. And then being able to have the interface of music to the mycelial networks that are reverberating. I mean, there's several miles of mycelium per cubic inch, and these are fine threads like the strings on a bass, and they are reverberating and stimulated by music. This to me is profound. It means that those people that are celebrating nature with music are actually enhancing food biosecurity, enhancing the integrity of the ecosystem. There is a direct connection, I think, between music, mycelium, and environmental health.
Which would
This
now
is
be
like-
a perfect time to announce Dead and Company's next tour.
Speaking of which, I gotta get to the studio. So I
Yeah,
got,
absolutely. Thank
Yeah.
you guys so much. Like, wow.
Wow, that
Bob,
was-
thank you for taking the time out. Thank you for taking the time, Paul. This is like the best podcast
let's-
ever.
let's get this back up.
Please.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Have a great rehearsal or practice session, Bob. Bless
Thank
you,
you.
We have
man.
to pick this
Bob.
back up.
We need a new anthem. So, you know,
No pressure, Bob.
no pressure there. All right, brothers.
Man.
Bye,
Let's
Bob.
pick this back up. Let's pick this back up.
Absolutely.
All right.
Please.
Absolutely.
Please.
All
That
right,
would be
bye, everybody.
incredible.
All right,
Bless you
Thank you,
guys.
Bob.
bless you all.